In this second two talks, we're going to talk about two things, and you should find them in your manual in, I think it's chapter 3 and chapter 4. We're going to talk about how to get the coaching relationship started, and then I want to talk about building trust, which is very, very critical. And hopefully what we've already talked about now will start coming more and more into play. Remember what I've already said. Let's just take a quick review. Number one is I need to be aware of myself. Absolutely critical, so that I can manage myself and I can become the well-defined, non-anxious presence, which is very, very important, okay? And I need to be, in some ways, I haven't said this before yet, but I need to be fully present with people, not wandering off into my own story, into my own stuff or whatnot. If I'm coaching you, I need to focus on you, hear you very clearly, and I'll be talking more about that also. And then in understanding yourself so you can become well-defined, remember we talked about the two parts. What is your bent? And at least getting you started on that. And some of these tools we talked about, one of the ones I didn't talk about is the Enneagram. Some of you maybe have taken that. The Myers-Briggs is another one, but the one we use a lot is the Strengths Finder. That's kind of enriched with this Core Clarity product that we use quite a bit to give you a real good sense of what is your bent. And hopefully then the story that you lived and the bent that God gave you, there's a correspondence there so that there's not a whole lot of friction and anxiety created between those two things. Let's talk about getting this relationship started, this coaching relationship. I used to do it a little bit differently in this progression, and then as I was teaching this to live audiences, what I found is as people got into these coaching relationships, they weren't quite sure how to get traction and how to get things actually going. So this is what it's important to do. If you look at your slides, and I think this is in your manual too, we start with the initial contact, that you have with a person. Usually, often it's on the phone, and then you'll have a first session with them. That may be on the phone too. I coached a minister down in Houston, Texas for 7 years before he and I ever laid eyes on each other. And I went to his website and I saw him preaching and whatnot on his, because he's got a big church down there, so he does broadcasts. But he and I never in person laid eyes on each other for 7 years. So I know what it's like, and I coach a lot of people that way. I coach them on the phone, which I don't prefer, by the way. I would prefer very much to have the person right here in front of me as opposed to talking to them on the phone, but given our world that we live in now, that's not necessarily possible. Although you can Skype. Some people do, if they do phone coaching. I haven't done so much of that. I've done just very little of it, actually. I'm kind of technologically illiterate in a lot of ways, but that is another way where you can be in front of a person, if you will, even if they're several thousand miles away. And I'm not exactly sure who you might be coaching. Hopefully they're close to you geographically. If they're not, that's okay. You can do it on the phone. But there's an initial contact that you'll make, and I put down some points here that I think are important for that. To first of all introduce yourself if that's not known, but just a little bit, because in the first session that you have with them, I reserve that session pretty much to get to know each other, to tell you the truth. But in this initial contact, I introduce myself a little bit, what this coaching is all about, how you understand coaching. So what you're starting to do, obviously, it should be registering with you a little bit now. You're starting to lay the expectations with people. This is what this coaching relationship is all about, as I understand it right now. So right out of the chutes, you're laying expectations with people. And remember what I said, if you don't, it'll bite you. especially if you try to alter expectations or bring ones in that, oh gosh, you know, this is important. I need you to wear a clerical collar every time you see me, or whatever, I don't know, whatever expectation you have. It needs to be as best you can understand it up front. Now, not that you can think of everything, or you'd have a 400-page contract, I would think, but certainly the important talking points you need to have up there, okay? And then in that initial contact, you're going to set up what is the first time that we'll actually meet. So this first contact to me only lasts probably 5-10 minutes. Saying, okay, listen, let's get together Friday. Let's get together at Denny's. Let's get together 7 o'clock for breakfast. We'll have an hour. And what I intend to do with you in that first time is just get to know each other better and get a sense of how this relationship I'm setting up with you will be value add to you. Okay? That's very important. In other words, we're not just going to chat and, you know, talk about football and talk about the weather and that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about a specific agenda, out of which then we'll contract. And again, whether you do a formal written contract or not, I gave you the example of one that you could use or something along that line. But if you don't, that's fine. Verbal contracts are fine. I think the formal ones, though, people tend to take them a little more seriously. That's why I kind of like them. But you tell them, when we first sit down, we'll get to know each other, and then we'll set our course as best we understand it at the moment as to what we're going to be talking about. So that's the initial contact, okay? Then there's that first session, okay? And let's talk about that. And there's a slide there, and I think it may be in your manual too, of what that initial meeting, that first session that you're going to have with this person, okay? And that's going to have several points to it. The first is that you're going to further introduce yourself, and that's what I do in that. Now, if this is somebody that you've already known in the past, obviously you're not going to go through too much of that. But the vast majority, if not almost all the people that I coach, I've never met before. So I tell them about myself. I tell them a little bit of my personal life, and I'm married and I have three married kids. I have 4 grandchildren, and then my experience. You know, this is, you know, I have a PhD in counseling, and, you know, I went here and there. And if it's a minister, I say, you know, I actually studied for the ministry. And for 5 years, I served in a church, and people thought I was ordained because I preached and visited and all that kind of stuff. But I really directed the counseling center, and I'm not ordained. So I tell them that, you know. But then I tell them about my experience, you know, that this is what I've done. Boom, 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 boom. And then I say, well, tell me about yourself. So I usually lead out, in other words, because, again, you're setting the expectations in what you tell them. Like I'll give them some personal stuff, and that's what a lot of that has to do with what you're comfortable with. I'm comfortable with saying some things to people, and not so comfortable saying other things to people, obviously. So that's going to be a matter of your own personal choice as to what you share with them. But you'll set that context, and what you'll find, by the way, is the vast majority of people will then follow your lead. They'll tell you some about themselves personally, and then they'll tell you about themselves professionally. And I like to find out a lot about that. I want to know when they're introducing themselves to me, I want to know about their experience. I want to know, you know, let's say they're in ministry. Did you work before you went to seminary? Some people did. You all know that. Some of you watching this did that. Maybe you worked till you're 40 years old in a quote-unquote secular job, and then you went to seminary, and then you went into the ministry. I've got a lot of friends who did that. Some people went to seminary when they were 25. You know, those are two different things. You know, so if they have a background in law or in organizational life or government or whatnot, that's a wealth of experience that they've had, as opposed to somebody who went directly out of college to seminary and has been in ministry. And I've got friends who did that. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying it gives you a sense of what has been their experience and what kind of settings have they ministered in. Have they been associates in large churches with multiple staffs? That's a whole different setting than if let's say they've been a sole minister in small churches. where they were the only minister in that church with maybe a secretary and a part-time youth person or something, and somebody who's a volunteer song leader or worship leader. Those are very, very different settings, but it'll give you an idea as to what has been their experience. And I want to know that. And then the last part of this first session, which is very, very important, is talking to them about the expectations. Which, again, that's a word you're hearing me use a lot, and you should, and that's good. And that starts with, what is the coachee's responsibility? Now, you can start it with your responsibility if you want, either one. But, okay, here's my responsibility as I understand myself as a coach. I am, first of all, I'm going to be on time, and I'm going to probably send you emails about what you're hearing and what you're learning and that kind of thing. You can expect me to be present for the whole time we're here, to lend my expertise to what I'm hearing. That's what you can expect from me. Now let's talk about what we can expect from you, and I put down some of those things, okay? I expect from you that you will be a willing participant in this, that you will be a very active participant in this. In other words, I don't see you as a passive vessel in which I'm going to dump knowledge. I see this as very much a dialogue, and by the way, I expect to learn things from you. I really realize, even though I've been in ministry for 30 years or whatever you've been in ministry, there's a ton that I don't know and need to learn, and I'll probably be learning from you. So there's going to be a mutual learning to this, but I really expect you to be very, very actively involved in what we're talking about, okay? In other words, it isn't like I have some sort of set agenda. Like, okay, next week we're going to talk about preaching, and then next month we're going to talk about administration, and the next month we're going to talk about how to run an effective vestry. I don't have an agenda in that regard. I will scratch where it itches. So you're going to have to tell me where it itches, number one, and then interact with me around how that actually operates in your life to help us then figure out what's going on so we can help move you forward in the direction that you want to go. Okay? So the expectations then around those things, this is also where you talk about confidentiality. You may, depending on your, if you have some sort of prior relationship with this person or some other relationship with this person, you may want to talk about expectations. Like when I used to do counseling, I'd tell people, listen, I appreciate if you want to invite me to your Christmas party, but I probably won't show up because this relationship needs particular boundaries so I can keep you safe. And if I show up at parties and then people start asking me, how do I know you? Either I got to lie or I've got to break confidentiality, and both those alternatives don't work well for me. So I'm not going to show up at your parties. Okay, that's what I would say. That's my counseling speech. Now, again, as a coach and a colleague and ministry and all that kind of thing, it could be different for you, but you need to think through that if you have a dual relationship. After your coaching session, if the person says, let's say you do it at 5 o'clock at night and they say, let's go have beer and dinner together, are you going to say yes? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying you ought to think about it as to, do you think this may contaminate the relationship in some particular way or confuse the relationship as to what we understand each other to be at this point? So the only thing I want you to do is think about that. That's what's important.